Hello and welcome to Beyond Business, the program where we look at how countries and companies compete in the global economy. What's fair and what's not when it comes to spreading democracy and human rights? Are the rules to that game? The Washington-based organization Freedom House says it's committed to spreading democratic ideals worldwide. It openly says it's helping activists in countries like Burma and Belarus to get organized and stand up against repression. But the NGO has been harshly criticized. It's funded by the US government, and that sparked accusations that Freedom House is an American foreign policy tool, something the organization denies. Philip Crowther has more now from Washington.
One of many discreet facades, one of many lobbies and NGOs in Washington, D.C. Here they try to keep an eye on the whole world. Cairo, Harare, Kampala, just some of the places where Freedom House has a permanent presence. Around 120 people work for this NGO at its headquarters in the capital, in New York, and in the field offices. Freedom House has been around for 70 years, a birthday celebrated with pride in Washington this October. Among those honored is Burmese democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi. She sings the praises of Freedom House.
To receive the Freedom Award from Freedom House has a special meaning for me, and I hope that I will be able to make you proud of what we are able to achieve in the way of freedom in Burma.
These images from Burma are used to promote its activities, but Burma is one of those countries where Freedom House would like to be a catalyst for freedom, an active promoter of democracy by helping dissidents organize themselves, by training them for non-violent protest.
They work in countries where there is little or no liberty. Sometimes they can't work directly in those countries, and they have to work outside with dissidents they come out to get training there in places like Belarus or perhaps in Burma, where they have to come outside to get the training. But we work in countries all over the world, no matter how autocratic they are and how little liberty they have.
And it's the NGO itself that decides where there is liberty and where there is not. Its annual reports on freedom in the world have a large impact, but it's the work in the field that is more controversial. Its role after the fall of the Berlin Wall, for example. Now Freedom House is looking towards the Arab uprisings and doesn't deny it was already in Egypt before the revolution began.
We were not a formal presence there, and we worked with activists and civil society organizations prior to the revolution.
David Kramer is a former Assistant Secretary of State, now the president of Freedom House. He rejects the common accusation that his NGO acts to help regime change.
We're not a revolutionary organization. We don't spawn revolutions. What happens in these countries is due to the movements inside these countries.
There is no denying, though, that a very large part of the financing, 89%, comes straight from the US government.
We made no secret about that, but we are an independent organization. We certainly have criticized the US government. We don't take orders from the State Department or from the US Agency for International Development or from the White House.
The annual budget stands at around $20 million. With that money, Freedom House has become one of the most influential promoters of democracy in the world.
Let's get more now on the role of NGOs with Ole Solvang. He's an emergencies researcher and security advisor for the organization Human Rights Watch. Welcome to the program and welcome to France 24.
Thank you.
Now, what do you make of Freedom House? There's been a lot of criticism of it and certain questions when it comes to its independence.
Well, I think the reportage that we just saw and Freedom House shows that NGOs work in many different ways. And personally, I've interacted with Freedom House on many occasions, from when I started with Human Rights Watch in Uzbekistan, for example, until recently. My interactions with Freedom House has been always very positive, and they played an important role in supporting activists and human rights defenders in the countries where I've come across them.
Some critics have said that perhaps Freedom House has a certain right-wing bias, and they point to the fact that former Republican officials are actually working with Freedom House or have worked with Freedom House, such as the former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, as well as Paul Wolfowitz. Have you seen any traces of that when you have been interacting with with Freedom House that indeed they have that kind of conservative, right-wing, lenient sort of attitude?
I have to say that I personally have not, and I think it is important to, whenever we look at any NGO, that we look at not who necessarily is their backers or who are involved, but look at these NGOs and evaluate what they're actually doing, and take that as the criteria for evaluating how effective NGOs are and whether there is any kind of bias in any of their work.
Now, are there any rules to the game, so to speak, when it comes to spreading democracy and human rights? How do you go about doing your work within Human Rights Watch? What's your way of doing things?
Well, different organizations have different mandates and different methods on how to work. For us, at Human Rights Watch, it's incredibly important to both be independent and to be seen as independent and objective in terms of what we are doing. We're therefore quite careful about who we're receiving funding from, not because that would change the way that we work, but it would change perhaps the perception of how we work and how we operate. I would also like to underline that Human Rights Watch, as many other human rights organizations, are not in the business of regime change. We are consistently criticizing regimes for their human rights abuses and trying to put an end to those abuses, but without having a position about whether a regime should change or not.
But how do you go about your work? Freedom House openly says that it's supporting activists to stand up against repression in certain countries like, as I said before, Belarus and like Burma. Do you do that same work? Do you do that?
Well, an important part of the work of, I think, all international human rights organizations is to support local human rights movements. And Human Rights Watch is a relatively small organization compared to many other organizations, and we're completely dependent on a network of local human rights activists to support us, to tell us about what's going on inside a country, to help us locate victims and witnesses who have seen a particular thing. And in that sense, it is important for us that there is a vibrant, very much alive human rights network and human rights activists who can support us and who can complement the work that we do on the international arena with work on the domestic arena.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about funding. You said before that Human Rights Watch is really monitoring who it gets money from. How do you go about doing that, and who does pay for you?
Well, I think an important rule, if you like, or important principle for all NGOs and all entities should be that funding should be transparent. It should be easy to see who is funding what. In terms of Human Rights Watch, we have as a rule, as a principle, that we do not accept any funding from governments. And this is to ensure that we are not only independent, but that we're also seen as independent, and that it will not be possible to accuse us of being lenient on a particular government, for example, because we're getting funding from it. So all our funding comes from either private individuals, or which is the bulk of the funding, or foundations, and to some extent events that we organize ourselves.
But how do you monitor that? How do you monitoring the funding situation?
Well, we have very specific rules even for private individuals and foundations who can and cannot give us money. For example, because we occasionally or sometimes are put in a position where we do criticize actors in the extractive industries, for example. We have rules that we do not accept money from companies working in extractive industries, and not even from private individuals whose resources are coming from the extractive industries. And we have a division at Human Rights Watch called Business and Human Rights. And of course, they're looking very closely at how business is involved or implicated in human rights, violations, but at the same time, they're an integral part in terms of vetting potential donors for the organization to make sure that there cannot be a conflict of interest for us.
Now, another point of criticism against Freedom House has been the fact that, they've been criticized for only working in countries that the American administration themselves or itself is criticizing, such as Burma, such as Venezuela, for instance, and such as Belarus. How do you pick your targets, so to speak? How do you go about deciding where you're going to put your resources in?
Well, Human Rights Watch works in about 90 countries around the world. And of course, we don't put an equal amount of resources into all those countries. And because our resources are limited, we also have to make choices in terms of what countries we work on, what projects we take on. And for us, there are several criteria. One of them is the severity of the abuses. For example, if there is a particular type of violation that concerns a lot of people or has very severe implications for the people that are concerned, that would mean that we might prioritize that topic, that issue. But we also look very much at what we can do with it. Mm-hmm. And so if there is a topic where we see that there is an opportunity for us to really make it change, if there's an important piece of legislation coming up in a country, if there's an international treaty being developed, then those are the kind of developments that we will use to prioritize the issues that we're working on and perhaps put more resources into issues where we know that we can make a significant change.
All right, we have run out of time. Ola Solvang from Human Rights Watch, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to wrap up the program as well. Thanks for watching France 24.